I've titled this video Happy No Lidays, and I chuckle when I say that, although I don't mean it to be necessarily funny. There's a really important message that I'll be sharing in this video, but the alternative to that is Happy Don't. And I think this really butts up against dominant narratives of what the holiday season means, particularly for women who are in family settings with children, with different generations, where we're often expected to be the social glue that keeps traditions going, even at the cost of ourselves. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes today sharing ways in which you can enter this season with more authenticity, with more self-awareness, and with some healthy boundaries that may help you reimagine what it means to honor tradition and reclaim ritual that's meaningful for you without sort of placating to others' expectations of what that should and has looked like in the past. So one of the important things that I like to do when reframing the holiday season, and I do refer to it as sort of a general holiday season because it has elements of religiosity in different traditions. Other communities are looking at it as a more kind of holistic, earth-centered Yule festival, which is what resonates with me actually now more personally. So I'll generally speak to this season as the holiday season. But across the board, culturally, women are sort of expected to be the ones that curate or cultivate this season, which can be meaningful for many of us to a certain degree. And it very easily goes into the territory of taking away our sense of agency and boundaries and really a sense of self as we try to serve and please others in a way that has become unsustainable for many of us. So if that resonates with you, then keep listening because I'll offer some guidelines of how to make this season more balanced, more meaningful, more personal to you and the values that you have for you and your family. So my desire to say no during the holidays began very young, but I was part of a family that had a dominant narrative where I felt like I couldn't question the established norms and traditions that we had. So there are a couple that I'll share with you here that really come out in a clear way as moments in which I wanted to experience something different, but I felt like I couldn't. So as a young child, we would have various people over to our house often. My parents liked the idea of entertaining. I use that in quotation marks. And I, from a very young age, really was so frustrated by one particular guest that my parents would have a lot, who would plant this really gross, wet kiss on my lips every time that we would get together over the holidays. It disgusted me. It felt like a violation. I absolutely cringed when I knew he was coming over. It was a colleague of my dad's from work, something that I really couldn't bring up. And that began this questioning of why are we perpetuating certain traditions that may actually be harmful for some people? So moving into my young childhood, my adolescence, there was also silencing and later shaming around an aunt in my family who had decided to no longer participate in family gatherings. And rather than explain or try to have some compassion around what was happening in that instance, there was silencing and shaming in ways that I was really unsatisfied with. And so that continued into adulthood, where I really looked at holiday gatherings with this sense of uncertainty as there was an unwillingness to address this major dynamic in my family system. I think another aspect was the overplanning of parties and family gatherings that my parents had. They enjoy socializing, which I think is an important value, but at the cost of kind of a more contemplative and balanced holiday season, especially when my brother and I were home from college. I found that went up to another degree of intensity and expectation that we really were exhausted by and was no longer helpful. And then I think something that I found in my young adulthood as I was introducing my own to-be husband into the family, there were arbitrary rules and territorialism around holiday traditions. In fact, my mother at one point early in my dating relationship with my now husband said that he would not be welcome at Christmas unless there was a ring on my finger. And that had never been expressed to me before. It was an arbitrary rule that was just decided on the spot and something that I strongly disagreed with, and really started a narrative of questioning for myself some of these dominant expectations, rules, and again, territorialism around whose holiday we're celebrating. So in my own career, I found that there were important observations around this season that helped me reframe it in a important way. One of which is the holidays can be a really triggering season for people. I used to work in a women's homeless shelter that worked with women who were survivors of domestic abuse and addiction. And the holiday season oftentimes was very triggering because it brought back family system issues of abuse, neglect, that were really, really harmful and troubling. And so for many in that community, the holiday season was a common time to relapse. If there were unresolved issues, unresolved grief and trauma, that season, one that had so much expectation on sort of the exterior happiness and glowing sort of holiday season, was really inconsistent with the experience that many of these women have and many of us have moving into the season. So being aware of the ways in which the season can be triggering and taking good care of yourself if that is the case. Another element of my career, as many of you know, as a former clergy, I saw the shadow side of performing Christmas. In some ways similar to my family upbringing, where there was this performative element to the holidays. But in the first church I served, it was a very big church that had kind of a high church culture, and the Christmas season was the ultimate season to kind of perform. And I felt that as a solo pastor, a young pastor, that I couldn't question some of those traditions and norms. And I found myself on my first child's first Christmas that I was unable to tuck her in at night because of going to and leading the Christmas Eve service, and then having to leave her the next morning on her first Christmas in her warm fleece pajamas while I led a worship service to only a handful of people because Christmas had fallen on a Sunday that year. So I promised to myself at that point I would leave the ministry before ever having to do anything for the church on a Sunday if it happened to fall on Christmas. And fortunately, I did leave the ministry before that would happen. So I feel very proud of myself for doing that. So a couple quick tools, as I've given you a little bit of a context why the idea of holidon't or happy nolidays is really important to me. And if it is to you, here are some things that you can do. If there is a hesitation that you have for any event or holiday invitation, whatever it might be, if you are hesitating to make that commitment, then most likely the answer is no. Leaning into that answer and understanding that that is a full sentence. While others may push back and judge maybe your decision to not participate in something, that is something for them to deal with, and you do not have to explain that to other people. Another important element is releasing the hold that family of origin traditions have over you, that the expectation to continue those traditions really may have no reason other than just doing what has been done before. If those traditions are no longer serving you or no longer offering meaning, and in some cases causing harm in your current chosen family and the family that you're raising, then letting go of those traditions may be a really important move in reclaiming this season on your terms. I think another important extension of that is limiting contact with people who have different expectations of the season and those who have a different sense of what your role is in that season. If your understanding of how you want to be and relate in the season, it butts up against expectations that people have of you sort of being there for everyone in ways that maybe have been practiced by women in your family before, then it's a time to ask yourself, is that something or someone that you want to share the season with? Really great to have a therapist during this time of year. If you regularly see a therapist, maybe add another visit during this season, because oftentimes the holiday season brings up unresolved conflict with family. It brings up a sense of obligation and expectation that you may be uncertain how to navigate, in particular the backlash that you may get from other family members who may have in their sense of idea of identity needing to perpetuate those traditions that are no longer serving you. And I think an important one related to sort of organized religion and the ways in which we may think that religion owns this season is that religion does not have ownership over this season. Really, the majority of religious traditions come from pre-religious times, very much related to the earth and the cyclical turning of the earth. I'll link some other videos below that point to this. So if you're feeling like withdrawing from religion, there's a sense of judgment and uncertainty of, well, what else is there? There is such a beautiful, expansive, and really timeless way of celebrating this season that is removed from religion, particularly if that space has been one of harm or betrayal or trauma for you. And I think the last thing I will share is that as we determine what traditions and rituals we want to cultivate, that as we let go or discard or reframe old traditions, that there will be new space, that when you clear out the closet, so to speak, on what we've been doing or practicing or the norms that we've been perpetuating about this season, when we clear that out and really identify, is this serving me? We will have more space to cultivate more meaningful, authentic traditions and ritual that meets us where we are and reflects our true values and sense of self in this really special time of celebration.